On May 2nd, during the Sedona Forum in Arizona, the commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Samuel Paparo, made a significant statement. The United States will prevail in the conflict as it stands now, with the force that we have right now. This was not a casual tough remark. It was a strategically timed declaration of intent. For China, the decision to engage in military action in the Taiwan Strait isn't a matter of whether they have the courage today, but when they believe they can secure a victory. No matter how many warships China builds or how many hypersonic missiles it develops, it still understands one fundamental truth. It cannot defeat the U.S. military. Warfare isn't about showing off technology. It's about life and death. Without real combat experience, joint operation coordination, or the instant reaction capabilities of the U.S., any attempt by China to fire the first shot would result in its complete defeat, and this is something that even Xi Jinping knows. Taiwan is not just an island for China. It's the heart of the global semiconductor industry. Taiwan manufactures about 60% of the world's chips, with up to 90% of advanced chips. From smartphones to automobiles, from medical devices to military weapons, nearly all high-tech products in modern life depend on these tiny silicon chips. Should war break out, even if factories are only halted for a few days, the global industrial supply chain would collapse immediately. But that's just the beginning. The Taiwan Strait is also the second largest shipping route in the world, with over a third of global trade passing through it annually. The global supply chain would crumble if this shipping lane is blocked due to war. With the ongoing Red Sea crisis and the Russia-Ukraine war, this disruption would not be localized, but would lead to a global systemic collapse. The economic losses could reach trillions of dollars, far surpassing the 2008 financial crisis and even the Great Depression. This is the core message that Admiral Paparo was warning about. It's not just about saying the U.S. will prevail in a conflict. It's a strategic alert to China, the U.S. Congress, and global markets. Taiwan is not just a sandbox for China to experiment with weapons. This conflict will have no winners. Even if the U.S. ultimately prevails, questions will remain. Will TSMC still be intact? Can the semiconductor supply chain recover? Will global stock markets, confidence, and the U.S. dollar's credibility remain unaffected? A war in the Taiwan Strait would not just destroy hardware, it would dismantle the entire global order of the 21st century. The U.S. is not only focused on preventing war, but also on avoiding being dragged into a global catastrophe. This is a high-stakes game for the future of the entire world, and this time, the U.S. will not allow any strategic opportunity to slip by. Admiral Paparo said, "The United States will prevail in the conflict as it stands now." This was a carefully considered statement, signaling both military readiness and political resolve. The real meaning behind this isn't that Taiwan won't be attacked, but rather, even if China's military successfully lands, even if they capture the beachhead and raise the Chinese flag, the U.S. military will slowly push them back, forcing them to retreat. This declaration is backed by a set of operational plans and a firm resolve already in motion. On the surface, these are defensive deployments, but in reality, they are a cover for offensive strategies. In 2025, the U.S., Japan, South Korea, and Australia will complete a series of strategic moves under the guise of regional defense upgrades. 3 Patriot systems will be deployed to Japan to support the entry of Tomahawk cruise missiles. South Korea will bolster its missile defense capabilities while expanding its 35A squadrons to ensure air superiority over the Yellow Sea. Australia will carry out its first joint airstrike exercises with Japan, turning the Western Pacific into a reversible strike zone. Guam will finalize an emergency airstrip system capable of deploying over 100 aircraft within 48 hours. During this period, U.S. nuclear submarines will regularly patrol the South China Sea, the Bashi Channel, and the Miyako Strait, signaling a shift from strategic ambiguity to tactical presence. More importantly, behind these deployments, the U.S., the American Joint All-Domain Command and Control System will begin testing an Asian operational version. In combat, the U.S. military will be able to integrate air, sea, and space operations within 72 hours, executing cross-national, cross-service, and cross-island chain combat in real time. The focus isn't on defending, but on retaking. Admiral Paparo's words aren't just a deterrent to China, they're also meant to reassure U.S. allies. The U.S. understands that Taiwan is small, and if the Chinese military abandons its battle damage control and opts for a hard, direct landing, it could lead to a strategic breakthrough followed by tactical collapse. In other words, Taiwan might be lost, territory could be taken, and public morale would be shaken. But the U.S. military will return, and they'll come back faster and more forcefully than China expects. That's the core of why Admiral Paparo can say the U.S. will prevail. The U.S. isn't just about who can land first, it's about who will be standing at the end. The U.S. has moved beyond deterrence and is now focusing on retaking. They no longer assume that Taiwan will hold out. Instead, they assume that even if Taiwan falls, they can still win it back. This marks a clear strategic shift. Why is this important? Because what China fears most isn't that the U.S. military engaging today, but rather that China might win the first phase, only to face collapse in the second phase. China's military expansion, economic stability, and social control cannot bear the weight of a prolonged war that drags on until the regime collapses. Once China occupies territory, the U.S. will use information warfare, air and sea blockades, internal subversion, and strategic retaliation to attack daily, forcing China to retreat. Global sanctions will cut off supply chains, and China will not only lose a battle, but also face internal regime instability. This is why Paparo is speaking out now. His message is not just for China, but also for Taiwan, Japan, the Philippines, South Korea, the U.S. Congress, and global markets. The U.S. isn't just defending Taiwan, they're preparing to retake it. China's military isn't incapable of launching an assault, but it won't withstand the consequences. The real test in the Taiwan Strait won't be who strikes first, but who remains standing in the end. The key issue is not firepower, but resilience. Taiwan certainly has military defenses, exercises, and the will to fight, but the real question is Taiwan prepared to withstand a scenario where within 3 days there's no communication, ATMs aren't functioning, the command chain collapses, outer islands are lost, and fake news spreads uncontrollably? This isn't a test of soldiers' bravery. It's a test of the island's social resilience. Taiwan currently has several critical weaknesses: weak backup for undersea cables, a lack of redundant communication channels, and reliance on central government responses for cybersecurity and fake news management. These are the battlefields China wants to target first, not military command centers, but public confidence and the collapse of the social system. The U.S. will intervene as soon as Taiwan holds out for 3 days. Admiral Paparo's declaration that the U.S. will prevail means Taiwan must endure in the first wave. The U.S. will not act out of emotion, but according to a strategic timetable and international law. Military intervention requires 48 hours for troop mobilization and 72 hours for battlefield intelligence confirmation. The U.S. needs support from Congress, allies, and public opinion before taking action. The U.S. must ensure that they're responding passively and not acting provocatively, or else risks backlash from global public opinion. This means if Taiwan holds out for 3 days, the situation on the battlefield will change. As long as Taiwan remains intact, global support from the U.S., Japan, Australia, the Philippines, and South Korea will gradually take over, and China will be forced to retreat. What is the U.S. truly concerned about? It's not that China is too scared to fight today, but rather that in a few years, if China makes breakthroughs in quantum communication, space warfare, and unmanned combat, the situation will change. At that point, China won't just dare to fight. They'll be able to strike out of the first island chain, fracturing the entire Indo-Pacific region. Admiral Paparo's statement is a message to China. I can win now, but if you delay, I won't let you drag this out. This isn't the first time the U.S. has had a strategic opportunity. The real golden opportunity came in 2016 when tensions in the South China Sea were at their peak. China accelerated island building, deploying radar and missiles, while U.S. carrier strike groups entered the area, ready to strike immediately. Had the U.S. acted then, it could have decisively shattered China's expansion in the South China Sea. But President Obama backed down. The U.S. withdrew, not just fleets, but the entire strategic space for China's military expansion. Looking at 2021, if President Trump had won re-election, China wouldn't have made it this far. At that point, chip bans, supply chain shifts, arms blockades, and economic decoupling were all set to unfold. The U.S. was openly preparing for confrontation, not negotiation. At that time, the chances of success were even higher than today. But after President Biden's change in direction, the approach turned to strategic stability, and the momentum to curb China was lost. Then the Russia-Ukraine war erupted, the Middle East reignited, and the Indo-Pacific became a vacuum. China not only escaped containment, but gained breathing room, even preparing to turn the Taiwan Strait into the world's first non-human war experiment. So this time, the U.S. is laying down the law, not just warning China, but also correcting a missed opportunity for strategic retaliation. This message isn't just for Beijing, but for the U.S. in 2016. It can't afford to miss this chance again. What enrages the Pentagon isn't how many warships China has built, but how China is weaponizing the technology it controls. This is why the U.S. is no longer just focused on China's missile numbers, but on how it uses technology. When China acquires new technology, its first instinct isn't collaboration, but how to turn it into a threat. Take AI, for example. OpenAI in the U.S. invested heavily in creating ChatGPT, aiming to advance human civilization. China's DeepSeek immediately focused on simplifying algorithms and closed training, creating models filled with falsehoods and hallucinations. Can you imagine such AI being used to command a battlefield and issue deadly orders? This isn't war, it's slaughter, and that's why the US must intervene. Looking at the undersea cable incidents, in early 2024, 2 undersea communication cables between Taiwan's outer islands and the main island were severed. Initially considered an accident, investigations later revealed that the culprit was a vessel flying the flag of Togo, with a crew entirely from China. Taiwan has rarely taken legal action in such cases, but has charged the ship with deliberate sabotage of communication infrastructure. In early 2025, the main communication cables between Taiwan and Guam were cut again, while 2 more cables to the Matsu Islands were destroyed within a year. These incidents can no longer be dismissed as coincidences. It's important to note that Taiwan alone has over 15 major communication cables connecting it with Japan, South Korea, Guam, and the US West Coast. The issue isn't just about a few cables being severed. China's government has deliberately used infrastructure as a strategic weapon, constantly testing the world's tolerance. More concerning is that this isn't just a tactical move, it's a reflection of the regime's nature. The US also has advanced technology, but it never cuts other countries' cables because that would cross a civilizational line. It's a matter of respecting order. China, on the other hand, reacts to stolen technology not by innovating, but by destroying. It doesn't follow the rules, it destroys them. This is the core reason behind the US's hardline stance today. Such actions not only threaten the Taiwan Strait, but also global communication and peace. From the cut of the first cable, this war has already begun, though most people didn't realize it then. It's not just the Taiwan crisis, it's the deciding battle of the global order. If the Taiwan Strait descends into chaos, who will fall? It won't be Taiwan, but America's credibility. The world is watching the US, not to see if it can help Taiwan, but to see if it is still worthy of trust. From the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan to the hesitation in the Russia-Ukraine war, and now China's steady advances, the US has been losing not just initiative, but also the confidence of its allies. Japan has been rebuilding its military, signaling that it no longer fully trusts the US to protect it. Countries in the South China Sea are grouping because they're unsure whether the US will still intervene. Even Europe is now discussing de-dollarization and strategic autonomy. In this Taiwan Strait conflict, the US doesn't lose militarily, it loses the recognition of its role as a global rulemaker. China's provocation isn't just aimed at Taiwan, it's aimed at the entire Western order. Take a look at what China's been doing. Deliberately sabotaging communication infrastructure isn't just a tactic, it's an assault on the global data order. Seizing maritime rights and trade routes isn't just about expansion, it's about trying to redraw the global commercial arteries. Promoting the international use of the yuan and digital currencies isn't development, it's about undermining the foundation of the US dollar's credibility. Exporting the China model to developing nations isn't about cooperation, it's about imposing a regime of no free speech, no judicial independence, and one-party rule. China is challenging the legitimacy of the Western open system order. Taiwan is merely the frontline test in a global chess game. If China takes it, the entire world will know. So, the strong get to decide, democracy doesn't matter, and only dictatorship works efficiently. The endgame of this war is not the flag on the island, it's who gets to set the rules for the future. If China successfully occupies Taiwan, no matter how quickly they pull out militarily, the result will long remain in the minds and trust of the global community. International businesses will begin reassessing risks. Is the Asian market still worth betting on? Governments will reevaluate geopolitical alignments. Should they align with Beijing instead of Washington? International institutions like the International Monetary Fund, WTO, and SWIFT, will they consider a second set of rules? Tech companies will face a choice, stand with the West or align with China to access its market. This war isn't about whether Taiwan wins or loses, it's about whether the US will continue to lead global order. If the US backs down this time, the world will head towards a fractured, dual-track order. What the US is facing now isn't China's missiles, it's global observation. The real thing the US needs to protect in this war isn't an island, it's the last line of trust the world has in America. So in this battle, the US cannot retreat, and China cannot afford to lose. If China starts the war, it will fight a war it thinks it can win, but the problem is, this war won't go according to the script it wrote. Once Taiwan doesn't collapse, once the US military begins to retaliate, and once global sanctions kick in, China will realize a few things. It gained a few beachheads, but it lost the world's patience. It survived the first wave of attacks, but it won't withstand the second wave of economic collapse. It ignited a war for unification, but it brought about a systemic isolation backlash. This is why Admiral Paparo can say that the US will win. It's not just confidence in military strength, it's an understanding of the opponent's systematic limits and the global context. China isn't just trying to conquer land this time, it's trying to prove that authoritarianism can beat democracy, and totalitarianism can seize the future. If the US backs down again, it will lose not just one ally, but it will force the entire world to reconsider. Should the global leadership role be passed to someone else? This is why the US military must prepare for war today, why Taiwan, despite its fragility, cannot fall, and why China has hesitated to fire the first shot. Because everyone knows this war isn't just about who wins, it's about who will write the future rules.